Welcome to Hebrew Insights. This channel is dedicated to revealing what has been lost in translation, providing biblical insights to help solidify your foundation, connecting the Christian faith to its Hebrew roots, and restoring the new to the old. Join me on a journey through the scriptures from a Hebrew perspective. Today's topic, the day of Yehovah. In Genesis 2:1, we read in the English, "Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished." The first word we're going to look at is translated in the English as finished. It is kala in the Hebrew, and it means to bring to an end, to terminate, to complete an event, to consume, to completely annihilate, to perish, and to waste away. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as host. It is tsava in the Hebrew, and this is an army. It is a large organized group mustered together and armed for war. And this word comes from the root seva, which means to assemble, to come together, to attack in military formation. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is, he brought to an end the cycle of events and consumed the heavens and the earth and annihilated those of the earth who were assembled to wage war. Now, we have to look at what is the cycle of events. So from the beginning of the story up until now, we see that Elohim has created the cycle of evening and morning, which equals one day. It equals a day. And one day we know in the scriptures represents 1,000 years to Yehovah and 1,000 years as one day. So this is the cycle that he's speaking of. And we see that he has 6 of these cycles. So what this is telling us is that the time frame that he allotted to in the beginning, when we spoke in Genesis in verse 14 of chapter 1, we saw that we were allotted a certain time frame, and this is the time frame that we've been given, and it is 6 cycles of evening and morning, which equals one day, which equals 6 days, which then equals 6,000 years. So the time frame between when Elohim creates and Elohim destroys in order to renew is 6,000 years, and it is coming to an end. It is brought to an end in this verse. So this is very important for us to note because it's telling us the window of opportunity is only 6,000 years. So why is this important? This is important because if we know the dawn of civilization happened in 4000 BC, and we are now in 2023 AD, we can successfully calculate that this earth, this is only 6,023 years old, despite what we are told. So we see here that we are actually beyond the 6,000 years that Elohim has determined as the time frame before he puts this all to an end. And so we then look and say, well, if it's 6,000 years and we are in the year 6023, why hasn't he yet arrived? Now, the scriptures give us insight into why this is. And where we find that insight is in the book of Exodus, because what is happening here is the same thing that happened in the book of Exodus. Elohim determined a time frame for the Israelites to be in bondage to Egypt, and the bondage was to last 400 years. So we also see that though it states it was to last 400 years, the Israelites were not actually delivered until the 430th. The end of the 430th year is when they were actually delivered. So what that is showing us here, why that is important, is because we must take those same 30 years, because the story of the Exodus out of Egypt is the foreshadowing of the story of Yehovah's people, because that's who Israel represents, Yehovah's people. When the Gentiles cross over from following the God of this world to the God of the Hebrews, of the Israelites, then what that means is that they've crossed into being Israel. They are grafted into Israel. And what that means is that they are Yehovah's people. They are grafted into the people of Yehovah. They are now family. They are no longer seen as a Gentile, and they are now Israelites, if you want to call it that, right? Meaning you're all one family. And this is why you said there is one law for both the homeborn and the stranger that then enters in, because you're now family. You've been adopted in, and you are treated the same, and the same expectations are expected of you. So what this is telling us is that the 30 years we must add, because it represents that story. The reality of what happened in the book of Exodus tells us that Yehovah delivered his people 30 years after the time frame that was allotted. And so this applies to us here. We also see this reflected when Yehovah sends Yeshua to deliver the people of Israel from the bondage of sin, the bondage of their flesh, and walking in disobedience. So we see that Yehovah has a time frame that is established before he sends his son into the world in order to deliver his people, as well as those who would choose to turn their back on the world and cross over into his people. We see this, that he sets this time frame, and at the end of this time frame, Yeshua is born. He enters into the world, but it is not at that moment that he delivers Israel. They have to then wait an additional 30 years before Yeshua starts his ministry. So we see that it is not only reflected in the events of the Exodus, it's also reflected in the events of the future Exodus, which is the deliverance of the people from sin. That is what Yeshua came to do. So this 30 years is what was being pointed to in the book of Exodus. It was pointing to the 30 years that would happen between the birth of Yeshua and Yeshua entering into his ministry. And this is where we also see the same 30 years will be added onto the end of this cycle, which is what we are seeing in this verse. We are allotted the additional 30 years. Now, why is this important? This is important because if this is true, which is what the scriptures are telling us in the original language, if this is true, that means there are 7 years left. It says that it's not until the end of the 30th year that this happens. So it's very important that we know this, because his return is imminent. It is happening. This is important for us to see, because it's telling us that this cycle of events, this race that we're running, this sojourning that we're doing in the wilderness, making our way, working out our salvation in order to make it to the finish line and make our way home, is coming to an end. And this is why we're seeing what's happening in the world, and why the efforts of darkness have quadrupled down, meaning that they're no longer in the shadows. They're not hiding the agenda. They're very in your face, and because they know they have a short amount of time left, and what they're rushing to do, and why the hand is so heavy that we feel in the world today and in our lives, is because they are preparing the world to usher in the Antichrist. So the anti-Messiah is what they're attempting to usher in. And this is why it feels like we are living in the upside down, meaning the things that you would think would never be acceptable, people are accepting, and they're not thinking twice, they're not batting an eye at it. We're also seeing what we see referenced throughout scripture, and that is the passing away, the consuming of the heavens and the earth. It was once consumed by water during the flood, and we are told that it will then be consumed by fire in the end of all of this, which is the end of the cycle of events. This is why it's so important for us to see this, because we must make sure that we are on the right side. And in order to be on the right side, you must do the work. This is the time frame of working out your salvation. The working out of your salvation is walking in obedience in order to work the disobedience out of you. This is where the children of Israel struggled in the desert, is because they refused to change. They refused to change, and this is where we can't be caught in a state of disobedience still. If you refuse to change out of the old and into the new, out of your life of disobedience and into your life of obedience, you will not make it. You will not make it to the prepared place. You simply will not, as they did not make it to the promised land. So if we don't make it in, what it's telling us is anyone who is left on the earth will be annihilated. The earth is going down in flames, and anyone who is still left on the earth, meaning anyone who chose not to live within the boundaries and walk within obedience, is going to be left on the earth. So all of those people, along with those who are assembled to wage war against Yehovah, will be annihilated. And we see this in the book of Revelation. In Genesis 2:2, we read in the English, "And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done." The first word we're going to look at is translated in the English as 7. This word in the Hebrew is Sheva, and this word comes from Shava, which means to swear, to take an oath, and to make a promise. The next word we're looking at, we saw in the previous verse, it is finished, and it is kala in the Hebrew, and once again, it means to bring to an end, to terminate, to complete an event, to consume, to completely annihilate, to perish, and to waste away. The next word we're looking at is translated as work in the English. It is malacha in the Hebrew, and it means work as well as service. And this comes from the root malach, which means a messenger, an ambassador, a deputy. And this is one who is empowered and dispatched to fulfill the work, which is the will or the word of their superior. And this word comes from the root mala, which means to occupy to the full capacity. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as rested, and it is Shabbat in the Hebrew, and it is to cease, to desist, to end, to finish, to remove, to destroy, to rest. It is also a dwelling place. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is, by the arrival of the promised day, Elohim had brought to an end the cycle of events, his work which he caused to come into existence. In the promised day, he had rested, he had ceased from all his work which he had caused to happen. So what we're seeing here is that the root for 7 is to promise, to swear, to take an oath. The 7th day is the promised day of his return, of his arrival. So we have to see this because this is why this day is so important. Yehovah has made an oath. He has promised his people that he will return for us and put an end to the cycle of events, which is his work. Now, we saw that the root for work is malach, and that came from, that meant a messenger, an ambassador or deputy, one who is empowered and dispatched to fulfill the work, which is the will and the word of their superior. So we're seeing that this is the day that at the end of the 6th day is the day that Yehovah sends his ambassadors, which we read in the book of Revelation. He sends his armies led by Yeshua in order to complete this work. And what is the work? We saw that work came from malach, which came from the root malah, which is to occupy to the full capacity. So the work that he sends his ambassadors to do is to fill the earth with his will by removing those who are contrary to his will. And this is what the book of Revelation is all about. So he's telling us in the 2nd verse of the 2nd chapter of Genesis that this is the day. At the end of the 6th day is when the cycle of events, that work is going to come to an end. And the 7th day is going to usher in the rest that has been promised to us. And so this is what this verse is telling us. It's telling us as well that he caused all of this to come into existence. And we saw that from the very first verse in Genesis 1. He is the creator. And as the creator, he created all of this and caused this to happen. So it's telling us several times within this verse that he caused this to happen, and that it is in ending this cycle of events that he ushers in the promised day of rest. When you look at the meaning of that word, he ceases and desists, he puts an end to the cycle of events by removing and destroying those who are contrary to his will in order to usher in the rest, the permanent rest that is our dwelling place. And so this verse is packed with meaning. And we see this come alive in the book of Revelation. We see it come alive in detail in that book. But look at this. He's telling us in the 2nd verse of the 2nd chapter of the 1st book. He's telling us the end from the beginning. In Genesis 2:3, we read in the English, "Then God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made." The first word we're going to look at is blessed in the English. We've seen this word before. It is barach in the Hebrew, and it is a knee. It means to kneel down and to be obedient. The next word we're going to look at is translated as sanctified in the English. It is kadash in the Hebrew, and it means to set apart. It means special. And this is to separate something or someone from the whole, from the rest, for a special purpose. It means to dedicate, to consecrate, to purify. It means to be sacred and to be hallowed. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, we read, Elohim blessed, and we know that this means to be rewarded for obedience, the promised day, and set it apart to himself, because in it he ceased from all his work, which Elohim, the Creator, had created and brought forth. Now, what are we seeing in this verse? We're seeing that the seventh day, which was blessed as a reward for obedience, was set aside. He set it apart to himself, but he also set it apart to those he set aside for himself as well. As we saw, it is in the meaning of Kadash. It is setting apart something and or someone for a special purpose. And we see in scripture that not only does he set this day aside, he also sets apart a group of people. So what we're seeing is this day has been set apart for those who have chosen to walk in obedience to Elohim, because it is on this day, the promised day of rest, that they will find their permanent rest. As he rested from all his work, we will rest from the work. This seventh day is our final appointment. As we saw in the 14th verse of the first chapter of Genesis, we have appointments that have been given to us in order that we meet those appointments, and they separate us from the whole, from the group. The seventh day is the return of the exiles to paradise, back to Eden, which represents the New Jerusalem. It represents his kingdom. They have found their way home. They have walked in the word, which it states in Psalms that his word is a light to our path, because we are on a narrow path to make our way back to where we once were, which was set in the garden, in the perfect place where he made us and placed us. This is the path that we're on to find our way back, and it can only be found through obedience to the word, by walking in the word. So we see here that those who choose this way, choose this path, as Yeshua said, pick up your cross and follow me, they make it back home. As we do every week, here are your connections. It's important to go through these because they will bring the story full circle in a short amount of time. Here they are for verse 1. Verse 2. And verse 3. I'd like to close in prayer. Yehovah bless you and guard you. Yehovah make his face shine upon you and grant you favor. Yehovah lift up his face toward you and grant you restitution. Place my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Hebrew Insights, or click the subscription button in order to receive notifications regarding next week's video. Until then, Yehovah bless you and guard you.